Welcome to sampling. I'm going to be taking you through the next few weeks of lectures and exercises all around sampling and sample size calculations. We're starting today with just a very brief e-lecture on an introduction to various terminology to do with sampling. This is followed by some exercises that I'd like you to do before you come to class tomorrow. So, what is sampling? It's the process of selecting a number of subjects from all the subjects within a particular group or universe. This just means that it's the approach that we take to choosing which people are going to be part of our research studies. It's often not necessary or even ethical to include every potential participant in a research study. However, we need to have a method or an approach to selecting those individuals who do take part in a way that doesn't introduce any bias within our study. And this is what sampling is. So let's start with the term population. Most people will be familiar with this concept. It's the number of subjects in a place, and that can be either geographical or in time. So for example, a population could be all the children born in 2018. Populations can either be finite, so they can be counted. For example, the number of children born in 2018 in Sweden, we could collect this from the population register. Or a population can be infinite. This means that you cannot count the population. For example, the number of mosquitoes that can transmit yellow fever or malaria. That would be incredibly difficult for us to know the exact population because we'd need to be able to capture all the mosquitoes and test them for the pathogen. This makes it an infinite population, and this has consequences for the way in which you go about sampling. Next, you have your target population. So within that whole population, you have the specific population of interest that is being studied and which the results need to be generalizable to. So let's take an example of a research question that wants to know how to increase access to sexually transmitted infection testing among young people. First, we need to define what we mean by young people. So the population would be everybody. The target population would then be a subset, so 16 to 24-year-olds, or maybe 16 to 45-year-olds, depending on what you think is young. Then we need to decide whether it's the general population, or just specifically people who already access services, or already come into contact with healthcare. All of these need to be taken into consideration to come up with a very clear definition of your target population that your research study wants to generalize the results to. Next, you have your sample, and this is the set of data or observations that are collected or selected from the target population using a defined procedure. So you start with your entire population, then you define your target population, and then using the various methods that we're going to talk about later in the week, you select your sample from within that target population. The sampling unit is then the smallest unit from which the sample can be selected. So if we have a study that's interested in individuals, for example, individual student grades, the sampling unit would be the student. However, if we were interested in a study that compared different classes of students to each other, the sampling unit would be the classes and not the student, because it's those units that we want to select. You can take that up another level and we could be comparing schools rather than the students within them. It's just very important to be very clear about what your research question is asking, and that will help you define which level your sampling unit needs to come from. The sampling frame is just a list of all the sampling units from which the sample can be drawn. So taking that example of students, you might have the region at the top, and then you might have the different schools that are within that region, and then the different classrooms within that school, and then the individuals within that classroom. That would be your sampling frame. Common examples of sampling frames are things like phone books, or voter registration, or population registers and birth registers, and death registers, but also things like maps and GIS coordinates where they've mapped households. Your sampling scheme is in the method of selecting sampling units from within the sampling frame. And this is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, is the method that we use to select that sample from within this sampling frame that we've created. So in conclusion, sampling is the methodology that we use to choose research participants from the population. It's relatively intuitive as a concept. However, there are a lot of very specific terms that are applied to sampling. So it's important that you try to understand these before you come to class so that we can learn about the various different approaches to sampling. Thank you, and I'll see you later in the week.